Hello and welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the Historical Humans podcast. My name's Justin Woods, and I'm joined today by my fellow co-host, Cullum Coleman. Gwendolyn Allen was unable to make it with us today, but we actually have our first special guest, Nikita Gillespie. And
Hello.
and today we're kind of jumping into something a little bit deeper. We're talking about Juneteenth, the latest federal holiday in the United States of America, and not a lot of people know the history behind it. So I think that would be probably the first place we jump off there, Colin. What do you say?
Yep, sure thing. The uh, the celebration of Juneteenth as a federal holiday was only has begun in 2021. So that's just 1 year ago at the time of this podcast recording.
We're coming up on our
Uh,
second time having that holiday.
prior to that, it had been celebrated by the African American community in the United States since the end of the U.S. Civil War in 1865.
That I think that coincides with the end of slavery, if I'm thinking correctly.
You would be correct. The history of Juneteenth is directly tied to the history of slavery in that it is functionally a celebration of the end of that institution in the United States of America. So, slavery, the history of Juneteenth and why it is important it begins actually in 1862 when the United States military captured the city of New Orleans from the Confederate soldiers. This is significant because it shifts the central, I guess, home of Juneteenth, where it was first celebrated, into Texas, as many of the slaveholders in the area decided that rather than, be captured or allow their slaves to go free, they would take them and flee into the state of Texas under the rather strange assumption that somehow the United States government did not have authority over the state of Texas, despite the state of Texas being a U.S. state since 1845.
See, the thing that I have a question here is obviously when the Union soldiers came into town, they were fighting over a war of states' rights, right? Oh wait, no.
Do not
If the people are
in
running
any
away
way
with their slaves to maintain ownership, they're quite literally doing it to preserve that institution.
do not stay states' rights in front of me, man. I went to high school in Virginia. You do not want to know how many times I heard that bullshit.
Which that's exactly what it is. Every single state that seceded said so specifically because they want to keep the institution of slavery. It is clear, it is apparent. Anyone that tells you otherwise, it is bullshit.
Yep. In 1863, the slaveholders' worst fears was realized with Abraham Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation, which saw all the slaves within the Confederacy of the United States freed. This could not be implemented immediately as there was an entire army of angry racist slaveholders between the United States government and the people they were trying to free.
So nothing in history has changed.
What? No,
I,
it just took them a couple years, damn it.
no, I mean the fact that racist people trying to get in the way are still obstructing government today.
We're not allowed to talk about that. It's too recent, and the government needs to decide what it's going to do about it.
Oh, they're
Wait,
starting
the
to air it
government
on
makes
TV.
decisions?
Yes, they are.
I thought we always stay in a perpetual gray space between red and blue.
Nope. That does not happen when Justin talks.
Hey, this is not.
I blame everything, including my flaws, on you. You know this.
Yeah, you project everything upon me. I'm just the garbage disposal for all your insecurities and.
You have openly encouraged this. You have openly encouraged that behavior. Do not start with me. Anyway, 2 years later, United States troops arrive in a place called Galveston, Texas. And on June 19th, these troops announced the Emancipation Proclamation to the citizens of Texas. This is 2 months after Robert E. Lee has surrendered in Virginia, officially ending the Civil War, and 17 days after the Confederate Army of Trans-Mississippi, which held Texas against the Union, surrendered. There was continuous fighting for some time after the official surrender of the Confederacy because, well, Twitter just had really bad connection back then.
Yeah, in times of war, the connection breaks
absolutely
up.
Non-existent.
Also, the fact that the primary mode of transportation was boat and, walking and riding a horse. Like, they didn't quite have the internet. You couldn't just DM your soldiers and go, hey guys, war's over, go home.
Yeah, and as it so happened, the Galveston Bay area was the last place in the United States for the Emancipation Proclamation to take effect. So these were the last Confederate slaves to be freed from bondage. Some 250,000 people freed, 250,000.
Geez, so that was not a small or insignificant amount of people. I mean, there were about 3 million slaves at the time?
Yep, there were 3 million Confederate slaves, and 250,000 managed to evade the Emancipation Proclamation for 2 years, thanks to racism.
That would be a tragic story in and of itself, except for the fact that people didn't quite take to it immediately.
Yes, so the major flaw of this announcement was that it was made by the U.S. Major General Gordon Granger. He's a 2-star general in the center of Galveston to the people who owned the slaves. These people did not do their due diligence and go home that night and tell all the slaves what had happened. Many of them lied.
What?
For a protracted period of time to get just one last harvest of plantation labor out of them.
So you mean they used deceptive and exploitative methods to increase their profit margins?
Well, I think a former slave in the Galveston area, Susan Merritt, her testimony sums it up quite nicely. Where she describes a number of slaves who had found out about the proclamation against their master's wishes, shot and hung over the river for attempting to leave.
Which that was the Sabine River.
Yeah, the Sabine Bottom.
Sabine Bottom.
Which is sort of it's just sort of an expanse of the Sabine River where it's just kind of, breaks apart, not quite a delta.
Yeah, so that's extremely unfortunate. And then by December 6th, the 13th Amendment was ratified by 3/4 of the United States, which...
This officially ended all slavery anywhere within U.S.-held territory, which now, once again, included the entirety of the United States of America.
And it reads as follow: neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime, whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction.
Yep. Translation: unless you are a convicted criminal, people cannot hold you against your will and tell you what to do.
If you guys want to hear us talk about the slavery in prison systems, be sure to leave a comment down below, because that could be a whole interesting ballpark to dig into.
But anyway, we come now finally to Juneteenth. In 1866, the first annual celebration of Juneteenth occurs in Texas, in the Galveston Bay area, as it was the celebration of this last group of slaves finally being freed. It occurs on June 19th, as it does today as a federal holiday.
Yeah, and then by 1868, the 14th Amendment to the Constitution was adopted on July 9th, and this guaranteed African Americans the right to U.S. citizenship. So even though they had been freed for about 3 years, and the war had been over for 3 years, it still took 3 years for them to receive citizenship.
Yeah. Yeah, after this After this, celebrations of Juneteenth sort of begin to ramp up. In 1872, Emancipation Park is created in the city of Houston. And it was created by a group of African American ministers and businessmen who pooled their resources to purchase 10 acres of land to hold the annual Juneteenth celebration on account of, the city of Houston really did not like them celebrating their freedom. The city even went so far at one point as to ban even the 4th of July and instead celebrate the Confederate president.
Oh, good old Jeffy Davis.
Yeah. So yeah, the city of Houston was incredibly hostile to the celebration. So they literally bought their own land and had it on that property. Because, fun fact, no matter how racist you are after the Civil War, you cannot tell people they can't gather on their own property.
Especially
try,
in the
but it
state of
doesn't work.
Texas.
Yeah, it does not work. And with this creation of Emancipation Park, Juneteenth really gains momentum as a cultural phenomenon and begins to really start spreading across the United States throughout the rest of the 19th century, as it just basically begins to take prominence, and more people are celebrating and bringing the idea and the tradition back with them to their hometowns. Juneteenth does go into decline during the 20th century as mandatory public education kicks in, which, as it did up through my education, openly refused to acknowledge things like the Emancipation Proclamation or the existence of Juneteenth.
Wow, you mean that some people edit what you learn in history class and aren't always truthful to the events that transpired?
Mm-hmm.
Shocked Pikachu face.
Please don't speak in memes. You're not good at it. You're not good at it.
No, but seriously, that's a really important point to point out there, is that happens a lot of times when there's uncomfortable portions of history or that may shed a bad light on some people. They just willfully and kind of diligently just remove it. They wipe it from the history record.
Yep. And it gets even worse during the Great Depression, as African Americans were discriminated against when they moved into the more urban environments seeking work on account of the economic turmoil of the Great Depression. One of the ways in which they were discriminated against is many of the people running the businesses, white people for the most part, saw Juneteenth as an illegitimate holiday, and that July 4th was the only truly American Independence Day, and would thus refuse any time off on Juneteenth, regardless of any circumstance, because they felt it was unpatriotic to allow the African Americans to, have a celebration of their own freedom. Yeah, Nikita is slowly getting triggered in the background here. This is why we brought her, as we discuss all the horrible things that have been done throughout history, so we can get to modern times just for her.
Oh yeah.
As we go through this entire painful nightmare. However, Juneteenth does get its revival in 1968 when Reverend Ralph Abernathy organizes the Poor People's March to Washington, D.C. This event exposed many people to Juneteenth for the first time. It brought it back into the cultural imagination of African Americans, made it a prominent force again, and when they went home, they brought the tradition with them of, hey, we have something to celebrate too. And they began to celebrate.
I have a question, because it obviously comes back in 1968. What other major events were happening around the same time that would lead to a revitalization of cultural aspects?
That is a good point. It is tied with the civil rights movement. One of the major factors in the revival of the Juneteenth celebrations was the fact that the holiday became tied for a lot of people with the idea of civil rights, and its celebration was considered an important way to protest oppression and to call for civil rights. The Poor People's March to Washington, D.C. is one such movement for civil rights. As you can imagine, a disproportionate number of the people who were poor in America at the time, and a disproportionate number of the people who are today, are African American. Yeah, statistics.
Which
They're so incredibly painful.
Yeah. But then you jump ahead another decade or so to 1979 or 1980-ish, which Juneteenth becomes an official state holiday in the state of Texas. And it's primarily because L. Edwards, who is an African-American state legislator, pushed for the legislation to make Juneteenth a state holiday.
Yep. Yeah, he pushed for it, and then over the next, I guess it would be 40 years, 42 states and the District of Columbia would, independent of the federal government, recognize Juneteenth as a state holiday. So it has had legitimacy for some time, at least on the state level, as recognition from the government, at least as far as that goes.
Yeah,
it had that legitimacy before becoming a federal holiday.
And on top of that, a lot of museums and other historical institutions like the Smithsonian, the Henry Ford Museum, they host specific Juneteenth exhibits to kind of highlight this holiday and to bring light to it, which I think is really interesting because obviously museums are phenomenal institutions, and go support your local museums.
Yep. And that's going to bring us up to today as in 2021, the Juneteenth was signed as a federal holiday by U.S. President Joe Biden on the 17th of June, just 2 days before the celebration would commence. And additionally, the city of Galveston commissioned a 5,000 square foot mural titled the Absolute Equality Mural on the spot where General Granger read the Emancipation Proclamation, officially freeing the last of the Confederate-held slaves. And the root of this entire holiday, really. So that actually finally brings us up to real time.
Yay! And now we have concluded the historical portion of this podcast.
Yep. That's what you think, because I've got a whole host of other dates that people proposed for this holiday that did not stick. There was a lot of competition. I
mean, you could also talk about the different names that Juneteenth goes by, like Juneteenth, National Independence Day, Emancipation Day, that's a good one. Freedom Day, that's very American, very patriotic. Jubilee Day, kind of homage to the Queen, God save her. Black Independence Day
refers to the amount of time it took between the founding of the United States of America and the actual freedom of the slaves.
I know, I'm being goofy.
I will correct you.
Juneteenth, Independence Day, or Second Independence Day?
Yes, Second Independence Day. We are now hobbits.
We had our first independence. See, the issue with that is, would you celebrate Juneteenth first, or would you celebrate July 4th first? Or are you, like, celebrating them in different year spans?
You are celebrating the order in which they became holidays.
Okay, so, like...
July 4th was Independence Day, and it's referring to a date in 1776, and Juneteenth is referring to a date in 1865. Yep. So anyway, as we were saying, there are a couple other dates too to go with this that were proposed. None of them had the clout or continued grassroots support to become the holiday that Juneteenth ultimately won out for. The first is January 1st,
Oh,
because
that's a
that
good
was
one.
the day the Emancipation Proclamation took effect. The
Or
problem with this is it's the day it's the day after New Year's, and it's the day that the U.S. government really likes to activate legislation on.
well, or you could skip ahead to the end of the month if the beginning doesn't work. You could go January 31st because that's the day the 13th Amendment was passed in Congress in 1865.
Yep. There was also April 3rd, which was the day the capital of the Confederacy fell, which, well, it is a very big moment for the end of slavery in the United States. It doesn't necessarily have the typical resonance of Juneteenth being the day the last of the slaves were officially freed.
But what about April 9th then? Go the day that Robert E. Lee surrendered.
Yep. Was sort of the same deal with a lot of them. Is just it just doesn't have the finality to it because there's still lingering forces that continue to fight for slavery and continue to hold on to slaves up until Juneteenth finally is able to put its boot down on all the slavery. It's the same reason why, like, April 16th, when slavery was abolished in the Capitol, doesn't work because half the country was in revolution trying to continue to enslave people. The day Robert E. Lee surrendered, the Trans-Mississippi Army continued to fight for another month and a half for the right to hold the state of Texas as a slave state. Yeah.
And then
They
you
were
also have May 1st, which was the day that former slaves in Charleston, South Carolina, gave Union soldiers, dead soldiers, a proper burial at the site of the fallen planter elites race course.
Yeah, they basically dug up the rich slaveholders race course track to bury all the fallen soldiers, which I think is a nice way to make sure you never get to have your nice shiny thing ever again, because there's literally thousands of dead patriots buried there.
Hey, good use of the word patriots. Let's go.
Yeah, yeah. This day was actually became known as Decoration Day, which was the precursor to what we now know as Memorial Day. This was the original Memorial Day. In 1971, it was moved to its modern date by an act of Congress to just be Congress. I couldn't really find a reason why they wanted to change the date so bad. They just sort of did. It was thought of also that July 4th, the American Independence Day, just tack the holiday on as a part of that, but that got shot down pretty quickly on account of the fact that the Independence Day for the United States of America did not actually mean freedom for everyone in America. And it's sort of a nice little just white people sweeping it under the rug bullshit.
Yeah, that's a good way to whitewash the holiday for sure.
Yeah. The final two dates that were proposed over the course of the 100+ year history of the holiday were September 22nd, which is the day Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, not the day it went into effect, but the day he spelled out what he was about to do. That fell apart on account of the fact that it didn't take effect that day. It was sort of just celebrating empty words, since I say you will all be free doesn't actually mean anyone is free, and people were not free for a considerable period of time afterward. And if you don't think 3 years is considerable, you do not know what you are talking about.
To be fair, though, not to justify it by any means, but they were fighting a war, and they were actively attempting to achieve that result.
Yeah.
It's just when you have a large armed faction, it's a little hard to enforce.
Yeah. And additionally, too, even if there had been no Confederate states and this was just a law that had been passed, it still didn't go into effect until the 1st of January. So that's several months of time between saying we're going to do something and then actually doing it.
Oh, beautiful bureaucracy. Never change.
And the last day was December 6th, which was the day the 13th Amendment was ratified by a three-quarter majority of the states, making it an official amendment of the U.S. Constitution and officially banning the existence of slavery from ever happening in the United States of America ever again.
Unless you're in jail.
That's not slavery. That's called convicted criminals. There is a difference. They expressly lay out that difference in the amendments. Yeah.
So now, jumping to modern days.
Yep, we come to modern day again.
So, what do you think about the holiday, Nikita?
Yeah,
what are
do you think
your
of everything we've
thoughts?
been talking about? Jump in. Come on. You've been trying so hard not to just jump
I
in
just
on all the
wanted to
horrible
let
things we've
y'all.
talked
I
about.
wanted to let y'all get all of the facts out. You've done your
Yes, keep.
research. You did very good work. Wanted to let you do all that first. Um, I would first like to tear through these dates myself really quick.
Yeah, go
um,
for it.
First off, I do agree with you that January 1st, New Year's, definitely not the day. Plus, again, there were a lot of places that were, they were still holding slaves. I would also like to point out that trying to celebrate it on the day that the 13th Amendment was ratified or went into effect is a little bit of a like, yeah, let's celebrate the day that the government acknowledged us as people. Cause like you see what I'm saying? Like this one thing to have like, oh, the day we stopped being slaves, yes. The day that the government finally say, hey, you get to be a citizen. Like, no, maybe not those dates. And then actually, one of the things I was going to talk about, the September 22nd, the day Lincoln issued the preliminary Emancipation Proclamation, there's actually like a lot of controversy around that because according to some people, and some sources like history.com, the first Emancipation Proclamation, like the first one he actually wrote up and was like pitching to everyone in the room, it didn't actually like say everywhere. It excluded some states, some border states that, and basically saying that like, oh, it's going to be free in these select places. So that was one problem with it. And another thing is the fact that like even then it was also kind of buried underneath the political move because a lot of Abraham Lincoln's office was advising him like maybe wait until we get another victory or two before even trying to say anything about freeing the slaves. So it was just like, okay, that gets buried in a lot of like controversy. So when you're talking about like the Emancipation Proclamation itself. So yeah, definitely not that date either. And then not May 1st because that's my birthday and that was so weird.
Yep.
To be fair,
Oh, yeah.
Juneteenth with weekends now falls on my birthday. My birthday is June 20th, so the celebration of the day will fall on there.
Yep.
I have no sympathy for you. I'm sorry.
I was very happy when Juneteenth became a holiday because now it means if I don't get my birthday off, I'll either get the day before or after off, and that's okay by me.
Yep.
You're an adult. You should be okay with not celebrating your birthday on the day of your birthday by now.
Yep.
Just a guaranteed day off work, I'll take it.
A while ago.
Yeah. Just look at late December over here.
Ooh.
But yeah, no.
It's
I'm
cold,
sorry.
it's dreary. I could have a barbecue.
Christmas is more
I
important
like
than
the
you,
cold. I'm
Colin.
trapped between everyone else's religious holidays.
New Year's is also more important than you. But yeah, I would also like there's a lot of things around Juneteenth that I find very interesting. I love that it is now an official like holiday on the calendar. I actually saw that on the veterans calendar for this year that's hanging up at in one of the rooms at my job. It is one of the days that the flag should fly. Juneteenth is an official raise the flag day, so that's cute. I'm sorry.
Yep. It only took
I'm sorry. Like the
156
fact that
years.
right, just knowing how a lot of people in the African American community, or I should say Black community, because that's also a controversial topic, but a lot of people in the Black community, as knowing how we feel about the flag, I don't think anyone's gonna be totally excited to raise the flag on Juneteenth, unless you're that patriotic, unless you really do identify as an American and with American values, you're not really going like if you are a veteran, if you are a Black veteran, I could see you flying the flag on Juneteenth. But any other person, especially with everything with Kaepernick and just knowing how like some people feel about patriotism, no, I don't think anyone's really going to fly the flag on that day.
Yeah, I think the idea of the mandate of flying the flag is less about how the African American community feels about the American government, and more the American government trying to make the statement of "we stand with you now." 156 years after the fact.
Right. That's what I'm saying. Like,
it's like the government like equivalent of like, we cool.
It's like someone took the phrase "better late than never" way too seriously.
Oh.
But sorry. I was just gonna add real quick, like, even though it does very much feel like better or a little too late, too little too late, it is kind of it's important to just note that it's signifying the importance of this event, and it is very validating to a lot of the Black community because it is like an acknowledgement of sorts. I know it's definitely not enough, but it is a good start in that correct direction.
Yeah, I think the biggest part of this, and I'll let you go right after. Just see, the biggest part of this is that it is the U.S. government acknowledging the legitimacy of this holiday. And if there's one community that knows exactly how hard it is to get the U.S. government to acknowledge your legitimacy, it is the Black community.
I know, but it's like I will definitely say that like I recognize the effort. I do. And it's not me always like I don't always want to tear down the efforts that anyone outside of the Black community or the government tries to make. It's one of those things where like that distrust is so embedded, especially specifically towards the government, that it's almost like a natural thing. It's almost like second nature to just be like, like, are you really making an effort? Is this just some like small move? You see what I'm saying? It's like always like a question like. For example, recently Walmart decided to release a Juneteenth ice cream, and there's been a lot of backlash, a lot of a lot of social media backlash, and there's also some people saying that like not only does it taste terrible, but this is obviously an insult because you are trying to commercialize and capitalize on a holiday, right? So like there's moves like that isn't entirely like tied to the government, but it is stuff like that, like with corporations or any like bigger representing body trying to like make that connection where you're just like, do I trust this or no?
Oh yeah, it's the meme. It's the memes this year with Juneteenth, following in Pride Month like it always will and always has. All the memes of the corporations realizing they have to respect both Black people and the LGBTQ community at the same time.
My favorite part about that though is their marketing shot themselves in the foot, arm, and face at the same time because they're like, we're going to make everything rainbow, but then in solidarity with the Black community, we're going to do black and white products. So it's just like this unintended homophobia associated with celebrating the Black community.
It's a black and white product, but it's just a 2-flavor cosmopolitan where the black and the white are perfectly segregated. Shit I see. The shit I see is bad ideas that should never have been made.
But yeah, no, that's definitely
I sincerely
like
hope that was a meme I saw.
That I noticed, especially like within myself too, where again, it's not that you don't want to recognize the effort that's being put in. It's just sometimes you definitely question the intention behind the effort. So
for sure.
With the calendar, anything that the government tries to do, the ice cream, you question it's like, what were you thinking when you presented us with this? Was there good intention? Was there bad intention? Like, was this just to increase profit margin? Are you actually making a legitimate effort to, make up for the years of like ignorance and neglect? So.
Oh, come on, Nikita. When has anyone ever done a token gesture just stopped at that?
Or, the fact that the token gesture ends on July 1st. It's like July 1st, Gay Pride Month over. We're back to everything's no longer rainbows and...
Yeah. Look. It's like putting out the Pride merch and then donating to the conversion camps in Indiana.
Oh.
Things actual corporations have done, everybody.
It's also why I refuse to eat at Chick-fil-A.
I refuse to eat at
Chick-fil-A doesn't
Chick-fil-A.
have the hypocrisy behind it. They acknowledge they're evil.
Yeah, if only their chicken wasn't so damn good.
I also definitely do not eat from Chick-fil-A, being a part of the LGBTQ community myself.
I appreciate the honesty. Like, no, they openly say they hate you. They're not like Disney where they just give money to people and quietly to destroy your lives.
No. They don't. The corporation, yes. So like, it's weird with Chick-fil-A. Actually, they kind of like have. So if you are the manager of a specific location, they won't discriminate against you. However, if you present yourself too honestly, they don't have a choice, right? Like it's just one of those. It's one of those like, hey, I as the proprietor of this location don't judge you. However, you cannot come in here looking like the thing that you are. So, right, like, or else I have to like they're gonna make me fire you if you do that. That's kind of like the controversy behind it because the people who created Chick-fil-A are homophobic. So it's one of those things like, hey, I understand you need a job, and I have no problem with the LGBT community. In fact, I'm a part of it myself. However, we can't look the part or else we all in trouble. Like, that's basically what it is, and it's so messed up.
It's such an honest evil at the corporate level, though. Like, they're openly admitting what they are, as opposed to so many others that will put the rainbow on everything for 1 month and then, give, millions of dollars to, eradicate people from the face of the earth.
But see, now we're talking about the capitalizing on the LGBTQ month. There's there's the commercialization of Juneteenth that I just really do not like. Like, not even just.
Yes, let's get back to exploiting black people.
Yes.
Like how do we make people think we're hip and we're cool? Because here's the thing, though. At no point do I. This is again what I'm talking about, the intention when people do stuff. When you start to like try and promote products that are like directly related to certain holidays like Juneteenth, who are you really marketing that towards? Because it's definitely not us. You might try to make it seem like it's us, but in all actuality, what you're trying to market towards is the other people who also want to look like they are like, with the group. So like, other white people who are probably trying to be more culturally conscious would buy this stuff to seem more culturally conscious. Do you know how many times I walk through this neighborhood and I see a lot of Black Lives Matter flags and I'm like, yes, and 9 times out of 10, there's actually not a black person living there. Do I hate that? No. I love the fact that there are other people who are willing to acknowledge and celebrate our holiday, not that it's their holiday, but at the same time, like, you acknowledge it, that it exists and that it is rightfully ours. You acknowledge the fact that Black Lives Matter. However, like, it's just, again, that idea of like, why are you doing that? Is it to look the part, or are you actually the part?
I feel really uncomfortable about that kind of stuff personally. As a white male, like, I identify myself as an ally to both the Black Lives Matters movements and the LGBT community, but I don't feel comfortable advertising that because there's a long history of white males like adopting and basically bastardizing these holidays, whether it is for exploitative reasons of profit and margins, or whether it's just a suppression of the holiday in itself. Like, I will actively celebrate it, but I don't feel comfortable being the flag bearer because I shouldn't be the face of the community. I should be a supporting voice from the background.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm just waiting for the moment when, especially since this is, the second year that it's been that Juneteenth's been a federal holiday, and now there's time for all the corporations to get involved. I'm waiting for the major fuck up that is the Juneteenth celebration jamboree picnic with fried chicken and watermelon as the only foods available, because I guarantee you someone somewhere is going to approve that.
No. It's going to be the Juneteenth sale where you get discounts on those foods at your local grocery store, like you do for July 4th, right?
Yeah.
I could just see it right now.
Or if you do it on Memorial Day, certain foods go on sale because people are going to buy that for the cookout. So now they're trying to anticipate. Listen, we got like butchers are gonna have a freaking field day.
Wait, sorry, we don't have cookouts. We have barbecues. There's
Exactly.
a distinction.
Listen.
I've never called it a cookout in my life. It's always been a barbecue, but apparently that is a thing that people call it like you invited to the cookout.
I've been invited to the cookout.
I feel like that's a southern thing. I think up here we call them barbecues. Down there they call it cookouts more often.
But southern cookouts, they
Oh, you don't have to tell me. I got family from Georgia. I got some family from Mississippi.
I got the Tennessee
Alabama.
hookup.
Look, I go to those things and I wonder, like, how many cows did you kill to get these ribs? As there's just a million.
Yeah, like just a war like treasure chest of just ribs and slabs of meat and just
like
barbecue.
A Fred Flintstone cartoon, and you know it.
I'm an urban girl. We buy our stuff from the local Moo and Oink in Chicago with our link card. Okay, that is how you supply the Easter dinner. Okay, yeah. But still, no. I actually am surprised though. Like, okay, it's only been a federal holiday for like 2 days, right? 2 years.
This is the second year.
2 years. But not a lot of people in the Black community know about it either. And a couple other things too. So the Emancipation Proclamation and the Civil War. I've always thought it to be like, I've never even heard about the states' right thing. We always thought it was primarily about slavery and only about slavery.
In the Deep South,
that was an argument that the South was even trying to
make. That goes back to the 19th century. It's called the Lost Cause, and basically it was a way for. Well, yeah, it's a myth, but basically a lot of the children and grandchildren of Confederate veterans, one of the ways they tried to keep the memory alive and tried to honor them was they tried changing the narrative. And this was early 1900s. So they began erecting a lot of Civil War monuments, like the ones you saw that were taken down post-Charlottesville. And there was this whole misconception and myth that the states seceded and wanted to fight for states' rights, not for slavery. That was just part of the states' rights. Like, they could choose to do that. But that completely ignores and glosses over the fact that they explicitly state in their letters of secession that they are seceding purely to maintain the system of slavery. Like, it is a myth, but they teach it in public schools. Yep. They teach it in the school systems in the Deep South that it was about states' rights. They completely gloss over the slavery part of it.
Justin, you don't even have to go to the Deep South. You just have to cross the border between the people who fought for the Confederacy and the people who fought for the Union.
So the Mason-Dixon line, got it.
It's like, it's in Virginia. And I was north of the Rappahannock, which the Virginians themselves consider the North. And I still heard about this shit.
Like, seriously, I did not even know that states' rights was an argument being made until I came to college. And I was like, or even just on the internet where there's people saying, like, states' rights. I was like, who taught you that? Like, that was never a focus. We talked about the fact that this was about slavery. The South was wrong. The North was right. You know, that was it. Like, support blue. That was it. That was the whole thing.
Where my family is from in Tennessee, not more than like 20 miles away, is a huge Civil War battleground. But then there's also a state park named after Nathan Bedford Forrest. And the whole fact that there's a state park named after a Confederate general who had an extremely infamous post-military career. Can anyone guess what his claim to fame is?
I'm going to assume going around killing a bunch of black people.
What organization does that, though?
Oh, the KKK. Did he create the KKK? I don't remember these people's names. I don't
ding,
care.
Ding, 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 ding,
they're not worthy of remembrance.
The KKK exists, and it should not exist. That is what I know. That is where that's like, I know some of the like positions that can be held in the KKK because of an economics book that I read a long time back. But other than that,
If Fury is the Grand Wizard, how much money
right?
should
Like
Fury make?
I know that there are some black people who have infiltrated the KKK and exposed them. Like I know interesting facts about that stuff, but I do not care to remember these people's names because they're not worth remembering, in my opinion.
Yeah, but
that might be. I'm sorry, their names are not worth remembering. Whoever created the KKK,
but to
obviously,
this day,
why would I want to remember you?
to this day, that park remains named after Forrest. And it's such a slap in the face, especially when you consider just the large percentage of people in Tennessee are of African American descent and were descendant of the slave communities. I mean, for Christ's sake, one of the reasons why Memphis has as many African Americans as it does is it was a major slave trading port on the Mississippi River.
Yep. Oh, speaking of people who can't let the past die, do you want to know a little fun fact I came across doing all this stuff? My bottomless barrel of facts. It's a bonus fact.
Oh, we love your bottomless barrel
At the
effect.
end of At the end of the Civil War, a number of slave holders took their slaves out of America to prevent them from being freed and sailed them to the only place in the Western Hemisphere that still had legal slavery laws.
Oh, man.
Brazil.
I
was gonna
I was
say.
like Brazil.
And there they founded the city of Americana, where to this day they hold Confederate celebrations annually to honor their ancestors who bravely traveled thousands of miles to set up a new home in a distant climate for the exploitation of other human beings. It's pretty divorced from the racism today, but it's still a horrible, horrible transition.
It's also just kind of interesting, too. It seems like that part of the world is a really good place if you fuck up back home to just kind of avoid things. Because, I mean...
Justin, that's the creation of their entire country. The king of Portugal fucked up so bad back home, he fled to Brazil and made it a country. That's the origin of Brazil.
Yeah, but my Brazilian German grandfather would argue that... I'm joking,
You
but...
mean Argentinian.
I know, but I'm making the joke that Brazil also has a large exclave of former Nazi descendants.
Yeah, you went to visit him, but your visa was protested by the Shoah Foundation. Thank you.
So my and this is where I love, like, because this all coincides with one thing that I've been thinking about. Something that I find interesting is well, it's not even interesting. It's a fact. It's a thing, and it's actually really sad. But there's a lot of people in the Black community that know nothing about Black history, such as I have Black friends where I have to argue the fact that there was slavery in Brazil. That Brazil was the first place to actually receive slaves, and they have the most slaves. We did. They have more slaves than us. That I say us. Let's see. That's what I'm talking about. That like.
Well, Nikita, I think everyone had more slaves than your ancestors.
Wow.
I would like to.
I am so getting canceled.
You shouldn't be striving for this. You're not Ricky Gervais.
But still, it's just a lot of people in the Black community do not know about stuff like this, like slavery existing in Brazil, the fact that they had more slaves than us, the fact that Juneteenth is a holiday, why it's a holiday, what the everything behind the holiday. There are some people who probably think Juneteenth is celebrating the Emancipation Proclamation because they have been given a very general idea of what it is because it's still so new. And I, for example, personally, if I was to go talk to anyone from my dad's side about Juneteenth, most of them would say that they do celebrate. They would probably be very well educated in what it is about and what you would do for the holiday. My father would probably give me a 3-hour lecture on it and why I need to be more proud as a Black person and a whole other thing, right? Versus my mom's side, where they either wouldn't know what Juneteenth is, wouldn't really know what it was about or what it was for. They would claim it simply because it was like there's a trend that I see with a lot of people in the Black community where the second that we find out a new thing about ourselves, we latch on really quick. Of course we want to, but we might not even have all the facts straight and we don't care because it's just another it makes us feel a little bit more complete because not everybody gets to really, use that pointer finger and show a part of their history.
But I think that's a very that's a very important point, though, to latch onto right there, because that happens a lot with disenfranchised communities. Communities that lost a lot of their cultural identity and cultural heritage, is you go through this reclamation period where you start claiming things and you start working to rebuild that cultural identity and shaping it in with your own like modern flair. This is it's a cultural phenomena, but it's something that's beginning to become deeper entrenched within those communities, and it's a reclamation of that history and acknowledgement of that past. And honestly, I fully support these kinds of movements because I think it's really important for each community to have these moments of acknowledgement of cultural identity, of inclusion, of basically saying like, this tragedy happened, but here's a way in which we can move forward in a positive manner.
And I would like to take a moment real quick to clarify for our audience listening here that lost in this context does not mean misplaced by the community in question, but rather actively destroyed by other people. as there, they didn't, lose it like you lost your car keys. They lost it the same way, someone, throwing a brick through your window loses your window.
Yeah, forced appropriation, loss of language, loss of their original names. Like, it's why a lot of former slaves don't have their traditional names. They, a lot of times, actually have the names of their previous, like, patrilineal owners.
Listen, there's a reason that there is a Gillespie, Illinois, okay? Remember, it took the North a while to realize that it was wrong, too. That's why they were like, you know what? Maybe we should actually fight about this.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's something that a lot of white people and a lot of politicians try to claim, like, we should move on from. It's a divisive topic. It's this. They'll come up with any number of reasons to not celebrate it, or to not claim its importance, or to just actively fight against teaching it. And it's that whole idea of just washing that away, of changing that. But then you do have the descendants who wear the name of their former repressor, and it's to the communities who it's important to, they can't shake that history away. They can't pretend like it never existed. To them, that's a cultural trauma that has persisted.
Additionally, people tend to identify with their names. I don't know anyone that is going to respond positively to being told their name is wrong and they need to change it, regardless of how they came to acquire said name. That is your name. You have claimed it now. Wield where it came from as a weapon, not it's not something to be ashamed of. That's my 2 cents.
Especially because when my father kind of like explained some of the history behind our last name, and anytime I go to visit them, in like the southern part of Illinois, and he kind of explains like the layout of everything and how just like you can actually like tell, because I like made a complaint. It was a very general complaint. I was just like, oh yeah, I really hate coming further south because it gets more and more spread out. And he was like, well, of course, because while they urbanized all the cities during, that big boom of industrialization, there's a lot of places that used to be like old plantations and slave land that, like, while all that went away, that doesn't mean that they really did anything with the land. So there's all this really like spaced out places in certain parts of like other states that used to be plantation land that no one really did anything with. And he'll go into a whole like history about that, and I always find that very interesting as well. So, and it's just like learning about the history though, like, it doesn't make me like ashamed or like hate like anything about like my name. No, because at the end of the day, for me, that just means like that's my way of identifying with my father. But as far as the history, like, if anything, I like to be able to know it, because again, that's better than not knowing, right? Before he says anything, I knew nothing, right? It could be his own story. It could not be entirely true. I could go fact check it, now that I have the ability to do that with the degree I have, but at the same time, it's still better than knowing nothing. having some history to like be able to like go off of, recall to, regarding your name or the history of your family is always better than like still sitting here like, no, I can't answer that question because I don't know.
Yeah.
Like, I hate people who can go on ancestry.com and actually just put in all these names. Like, oh, I know these people. I know my great 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 grandfather. I'm just like, I don't even know who my great grandfather is on one side of my family. Like, what? I don't know half of these names. I cannot trace them back to anything. So.
Yeah, and then on the flip side, I went through and someone had filled out the majority of my family tree, so where I could trace it back hundreds and hundreds of years ago, and it's just there's a huge separation between the two, and it's quite honestly just a shame.
Right, and a lot of it does have to do with slavery because most of those people died before they can really, they are not officially on the record for anything. They were just a body at the time, and that happened for a very long time. And there are a lot of other people who, again, get wiped from the record, even after like citizenship was a thing, even during the civil rights movement. Like, people are still getting like erased from history as much as possible to the point where there is no record. You would have to find like first person documents, which we know are hard to find. So like, it's
Let's
so
find
it's like
first person
impossible to really be able to trace yourself back.
Yeah. Let's find first person documents for people who were legally not allowed to read and write.
Exactly.
Let's
like
do
diary
that.
pages and
Hey,
stuff.
that's getting into a different debate. We already had our episode about oral traditions. We know that they're valid histories.
Yes, but it's also not a first person document in the sense of what we are looking for here as evidence.
No,
Right,
but
we need
like,
birth certificates, man, social security number, something.
The definition of evidence as accepted by things like the U.S. government is much different than things that could be used to tell the truth.
I really wish I knew the details of it, but I know that there have been accounts of people who have managed to trace their lineage as far back as the ship that their family came over from, but not being able to go much further because on the other end of the voyage, there's not written record that they can refer to either.
Right.
There's also the lovely trend from like 30 some years ago where it is everyone came over on the Mayflower. Everyone was on the Mayflower and everyone was descended from a Cherokee princess.
Apparently.
We
Can
all
you
know.
count how many things are wrong with those statements?
You know, the
like
only thing the Mayflower brought was smallpox.
Yo.
That's not true. It brought a bunch of dead pilgrims.
Why don't you just chuck them overseas? Just bloop.
But this is also why a lot of people have a problem with that, like, go back to where you came from argument that like will come up for like black people like way back. I think they used to do that a lot then, but like it's how it's even prevalent now, I do not understand. But people will say go back to where you came. I think it started with about Obama, and you know, everyone really wanted to dig into his background. That a lot of people were like, well, who else is like, you know, probably mixed with something that is from another country. And it's just like, oh, go back to your country. Go back to where you came from. I don't know where I came from. Thank you very much. Last time I checked, I came from here. And I, not that I'm very proud of that either. I wish, like, if I could learn a new language right now and go over there, I would. I don't care. The fear and the anxiety that I am riddled with on a day-to-day basis just from having to be in this country. Yeah, no, I would love to leave. I really would. There's so many, like, part of the reason I started learning French, I would rather live in Europe at this point.
I do find it's...
I know that's a hot take right now. I still would rather live in Europe right about now.
I do think it's very interesting, though, Nikita, kind of on your point there of, like, not having a place to go back to. Because a lot of the portion of the United States have ancestors that they could trace back maybe 2 or 3 generations at most to an origin or to a home country. And a lot of black people don't have that direct connection.
Exactly.
I know my case is a little different. I know the general origins of my family, but we've been here since the 1600s. Like, I don't really have that home country that I could default back to either. So like I kind of understand that regard, but it's still it's different. It's a different situation.
Right. It's like, because again, it's also the idea of like also being able to culturally identify with that as well. Like that's also very different for a lot of people. Like, okay, you might have been born in America, you grew up in America, English is your first language. But if you have some German or French or, some white European ancestor, you can at least feel some sort of connection with that. And you could probably even go there for, your work study or just for as a family trip. And it's just like, well, we know we have these ancestors, so we're going to go there and vacation for like a week or, maybe a month or something. And then you come back and you tell all these wonderful stories. I very rarely, not saying that it doesn't happen. There are people who can do it. There's actually some services and other like resources that people can reach out to where they will supply these long ancestral journey trips for African American or Black people. If you can, but some of them it's very like finicky. Like you have to know enough for it to happen. Like you can't know nothing and then try to go. Like you got to know something. But again, very rarely could you be able to do that and then be like, let's go take a fun trip to Africa and go like look down through our roots. There are so many reasons. Like, let me just go through it. First off, the fact that as like a community, as a minority, you are already so disenfranchised financially that just even like contemplating like boarding that trip is enough to make you go, no, it's not going to happen. Secondly, again, you already don't have enough of the resources to really be able to like go down through that whole entire thing. You're either not going to trust or be able to afford a 23andMe or anything like that. And most of your family also does not have the information you're looking for. So, in just so many different ways, like does the idea of figuring it out and going to like on that physical, like actual, like go there to that location, like journey through your roots it feels impossible. You don't know the language. No one's ever taught you the language. Some of these languages are very select. You're not going to find this on Rosetta Stone. Like everything that makes it possible for someone else to be able to do that, it makes it less possible for anyone within the Black community to do that. And that is frustrating. I can take a French class. That is going to maybe make up 13% of some of the languages in Africa. Just because I know French does not mean I'm going to know the whole entire African language of this one village, because French people had took over it during the race to Africa. Like that, yeah. So it's all really messed up.
Yeah, and speaking just with French too, French is one of those languages where you really have to make sure you are learning the dialect of the area, because it does not translate well from one section to another. Just look at Parisian versus Quebec in French, and it's like, what are you?
To be fair,
French is a very diffused language.
Quebecois are effectively speaking like 1500s French, 1600s French. I know specifically it's the 17th century where most of the population happened, but like it's an old French. It's like if someone came up to you and started speaking olden English, and you would like Shakespearean, you would understand them, but you're gonna go, why the hell is he talking that way?
But just French itself is very diffused. The French that's spoken in different parts of Africa, in the various parts of the United States, in Quebec, all these different Frenches are very it's a very dialected language at this point.
Do we brush upon Creoles then, Creolized languages?
And see, that's another thing. Also, the fact that like another point is the fact that again, a lot of people always think that if you were to try and trace somebody's roots, is immediately going to go to Africa if they're Black, right? That's also another misconception, because I think I've had my family definitely say that we actually do have some Haitian roots. That is not in Africa, right? Like there's like there's so many more countries that are not in Africa that also have dark-skinned people that you would probably define as Black, right?
So,
like Tongans. Yeah. That's not in Africa. So
I've had this conversation with one of my coworkers who is a Caribbean Black person, and she identifies as Black because it is that same, I guess we'll just dive right into that subtopic, because you can be black and not be African.
Yes.
Yep.
I had an experience in my undergrad that stands out to me to this day. We were in a large lecture hall, and it was like onboarding, and they're basically like, to show diversity, everyone who's right-handed, raise your hand. Everyone who's left-handed, raise your hand.
We've had this conversation.
Yeah,
Yes,
and
yeah.
but for the podcast, they basically said, okay, now if you're African American, raise your hand. And a couple of kids didn't raise their hands. And the presenter actually called them out on it, like, hey, why didn't you raise your hand? You're clearly African American. And one of the kids was a foreign exchange student, was like, I'm not American, I'm just African. And another kid was like, I'm black, I'm not African, I'm black.
Which is why I corrected myself at the beginning of my spiel when I was like, oh, wait, that's also a hot take. There are many people who do not identify as African American, identify as black, and vice versa. There are people who are from Africa or a, like, you know, second, third generation African descendant who was born in America that will identify as African American. There are black people born in America who will identify as African American. Or maybe it's just for the sake of the documents, you know, the legality of just bureaucratic paperwork. So, but still, it's just like, that is also an idea. And I think on many occasions, if someone was to ask me, I would definitely say black. I wouldn't say African American straight out. I think I use the term African American in more formal settings, or depending on who I'm talking to or what I'm talking about. But initially I would definitely say black. But there's also a lot of things that come with that I've always like questioned. One example being like, okay, for example, I live in, like, when I was still living in Chicago, after we had moved, we live in an area where there's more African Americans, African people who have moved here to America, who like pretty much stay with most of their family members and everything. And you can actually tell that there's a lot of tension between the African community and the black community, right? Even just being a black person going to a hair salon where most of the people who work there are probably of African descent or directly African, came straight from Africa. And a lot of there, you feel the tension because again, there's I wouldn't say a language barrier, but the idea that like you immediately are now excluded, right? We are not in the same sphere anymore. I am in a bubble and you guys are talking in another language around me. And does that mean like, hey, speak English? No, I'm not going to do that, obviously. It's the fact that like, this is different than if I went to a salon that was primarily black American women. And then it would be that sense of community and you would be talking and you would be gossiping and they would ask you questions. No, I am now being excluded. Like, they are not talking to me. They are talking to each other. This is their space, not mine, right? I am a guest in their space. There's a lot of their family members coming in. They probably have there are men coming in that aren't doing anything but sitting there and drinking and conversing with them, okay? This is their family. They came here to hang out. You are a client. You need to just not talk at all, okay? Sit there, eat your Subway sandwich, get your hair done. Shush. Right?
Wait, are you eating while they're...
Sometimes, yes. Listen, if you are getting braids done, that's going to take maybe 5-7 hours. You're not going to sit through the whole time and not eat anything. Okay? Maybe it's some chips. But if you are there for, like, you might want to eat some sustenance. Okay? I've had some people order me Chinese food before.
To be fair, I think I would just go there with a bag of popcorn while the braids are getting done, because just listening to the gossip, listening to the drama.
If you understand it, like, you don't, like,
you don't need to understand it. You just need to stare unblinkingly.
Now, yes. I told you, I did study French, and there are some African languages that do have French in them. So sometimes I can pick up some words here and there. Be like, that sounds like this word. Maybe it's like a derivative. Like, right? I should be sitting there, like, actually, like, trying to figure out what they're saying with what I have before me. Sometimes you just go off of the tone and the body language. Like, sometimes it's really, like, trying to watch a conversation that you do not understand is very interesting. But that's not what we're getting into. It's just the idea that like there is that disconnect though when you enter another like a space that is different from yours. You would think it would be the same, but it's not. So, like I said, you have an African hair salon, you have a black hair salon, and it's very different energies depending on who you are walking in, right? So, there is a divide there when we're talking about African Americans and Juneteenth, for example. There is one take that I've actually asked like some people. There's a girl that I used to go to elementary school with. Her, I won't say her name for the record, but she is Lebanese. And there was another girl that I went to elementary school with, and she was Egyptian. And I've asked them as I've like, because I run into them being older, and so we're able to have these conversations. So, how do you feel being African and in like spaces where there's primarily black people, right? Of course, they experience a different sense of colorism and racism, with people calling them names, black people calling them names, right? Things that we would already get called ourselves. We're going to start calling them those names, right?
It's also
no, go ahead. I'm sorry.
no, that's a good point, and I think one of the small little offshoots of that should be pointed out is you can be African and not black.
Yes.
There's diversity. Even in Africa, there's diversity. Granted, some of it can be due to colonial past, like South Africa and Namibia. But then, like, North Africa, you have Egypt, Algeria, Libya, like, all the like, African non-black communities.
And then there's also the idea of, like you're saying, like, with South Africa, there are people who, again, are African and not black, and then they're criticized for being not black, right? So again, this is the fact that like there's a lot that people within the black community don't know and don't understand that I think pours over, right? So they are not like just no, and especially because a lot of that is again connected to the racism and the prejudice that they've experienced here in America and what they know about the history of being black in America. And like for example, let's talk about slavery. There are some people in the African community that look down on people in the black community because of slavery. Right now, I'm not saying this is a large like thing that I'm not saying every person in the African community, but this is something that I have seen happen here, like be talked about here and there. So, for example, we'll talk about my friend who I say is Lebanese. While she is not one of those people, obviously, her grandma is. She looks down on black people because of slavery, not because there was something they could control, but the idea that like it's kind of like, oh, couldn't be me, and it wasn't, right? Like it was just like that's what it really like, that's what it kind of feels like when you talk to her about these type of things. Like that's on them, right? They whoever their ancestors are should be ashamed of themselves of allowing themselves to even get put in that situation. It couldn't have been me, and it wasn't my ancestors. That was your ancestors. Sorry, right? They don't have a reason to be mad about it because it wasn't their ancestors that was enslaved. It's ours. Like anyone who is a black American, their family is the ones who were enslaved and stayed here. And right, some people were like, why didn't they leave? What do you mean why didn't they leave? There was enough generations that went past. Some of them probably could have. Most of them probably
there were some that did return, but then they faced a whole different slew of issues of returning to your native country, and some of them were just dropped off anywhere. They weren't even brought back to their village.
Yep. Right. Let's bring in the American colony of was it Liberia, where we just said, they're all from this continent. I'm sure we just dropped them off in this one little corner we bought. Fine.
And then there's also people in the black community where when they start finding out the truth about certain stuff, one example being Zora Neale Hurston when she wrote The Last Black Cargo, I believe was the title. And when people started to find out about like what happened, like how some people actually came to be in slavery, you have black people who are mad at people who are like of direct African descent. Direct African descent because of the fact that it was other people in their own villages or in rival villages that were selling them out. Like, oh, hey, we don't like these people anyway, so let me tell you how you can go catch a couple of them real quick, okay? So because you're helping us out by getting rid of them, right? And then there's people like so, and again, it's not because like, oh, you are responsible. It's just that's what you're correlating it with. And so there's some of this like very like I say colorism because again, the idea is that you would be both of like a dark skin color, so you would think there's this unity, but there isn't because by all technicality we are two different races. You are African or African American, I am black or black American, and there's all these different controversies and opinions about what happened to who and how you should have reacted and how we should treat each other now. And again, it's like it's just so confusing. It really is. Because I sit here and I'm just like, you would think that we would all get along because as long as we're here in this country, they're all going to treat us the same. So.
No, but this is why I'm glad we brought you on and why I'm really glad you agreed to come on was because you're able to provide these perspectives that myself or Colum, I guess I'm speaking for both of us. Correct me if I'm speaking out of turn. But, like, we don't know this. We don't have that firsthand experience with that cultural and racial divide within that community. And unfortunately, whether for, well, it's for worse, let's be honest here, but you get lumped into that same group and there are those divides. And, you know, you look at white people and people don't just throw us all in one basket. They go, oh, are you European? Are you this? Are you that? Which subrace? You know, they identify as, oh, I'm Irish.
The Canadians.
Ooh. Makes my blood shiver.
Yeah, and Nikita, just to demonstrate a bit of a point that you jumped through, like it is generally a minority of the African people who look down on the black people for getting transported.
Right, and again, it's older generations. Like again, I said her grandma, not like her mom or auntie or something.
And there's a pretty good example in Senegal, I believe, of people taking the opposite viewpoint from your friend's grandmother. There is a museum that houses a thing called the Door of No Return, and it is a monument sort of acknowledging all the people that passed through Senegal on their way to slavery in the Americas. And it's a very heartfelt monument and a very heartfelt museum, sort of acknowledging the horror that took place in Africa and acknowledging that Black people and Black people and African Americans were once a great many of them were once Africans themselves.
Exactly, and like I said,
that them being sent off into slavery is the loss of these countries, and is something to be sad about and shameful. That is the loss that they experienced of all these people being forcibly transported. And so I think that's a very nice touch.
Yeah, and again, it's the idea that, like, I'm not saying everybody's just like, that couldn't have happened to me, but I feel like it is the fact that there is that minority where, depending on who they're descended from, or, like, how many generations of their family was probably here in America, how much do they identify with, the past that is slavery, and for some where they don't, they might either show sympathy, but like they don't really feel what we feel with that idea of like lost culture, right? And so I do love the fact that like it's not like I do love the fact that there are those who acknowledge the fact that this is something that happened, because at the end of the day, that happened where they live, right? That these people were taken from these places, and of course they would acknowledge that. So it is sad that there are those who probably like kind of push it as far away from themselves, but I'm sure there's a lot of other reasons that connect back to that too. Probably them feeling pressure to also have to like assimilate being here, right? If they see that like not enough people, like, oh, it is a trend that there are people who do not care about slavery except for the Black community, and in order to separate myself from this, and in order to like not be a part of the idea of the Black community, I will now separate myself from the idea of slavery. Like, oh, well, that's not something that has anything to do with me, right? So like that's just a hypothesis. I'm not saying that that's like what's really going on, but that could be one of the explanations as to why someone who is African American or of African descent would also disconnect themselves from the narratives of slavery.
But I mean, you hear that across the board. I mean, similar narratives came out of Europe post World War II, of villages that may not have directly collaborated with the deportation committees, but that just were by the sidelines. And a lot of those villages felt immense guilt about it because their inaction led to thousands of people dying, hundreds of millions of people being displaced. Like, it was just nothing but awful things that came of it. So it's kind of interesting to see how that, I don't want to say survivor's guilt, but how that mindset can change and morph over time. And again, it's changing now. Like you said, your friend's grandma held that specific view, and now that sentiment is beginning to change. And I think at the end of the day, it all boils down to just knowing how much you know, how much you can empathize. I think the more you know, the more you empathize, because you start understanding the plight, you start understanding the roadblocks, the issues. And I think this is why holidays like Juneteenth, to bring it full circle, are really important, because it brings up these discussions. It brings up these dialogues. We're able to have these conversations because this is now a thing.
Hmm. But I will say though, even with all of that, I don't think enough people are going to be willing to challenge the status quo right away with Juneteenth. Um, we've, as a community, have been so assimilated to just celebrate July 4th because you're American, right? Because that's the idea. Like, you have to like identify as being a proud American. So that's going to be July 4th is your day. And this is also, I was like, yeah, maybe don't tack on Juneteenth with July 4th. Do not do that, because then it really does feel like you're just making us celebrate it anyways. But still, and even now, like I say, like if I was going to ask my dad's side about it, they'll probably celebrate Juneteenth and July 4th. I don't think they would ever stop celebrating July 4th. I think
I
they won't
told
give
you, it's
much
an
thought to
excuse to
it.
blow things up.
Right? Like, I don't think they're going to give much thought to it or anything like that. We're not going to be flying a bunch of American flags or anything, but I think, yeah, it's still a day to, blow up some stuff, shoot off some fireworks, cook up, fire up the grill. People are still going to wear American flag themed clothes, because that is like, it's the idea of routine, right? It's very hard to just break a routine all of a sudden unless you stay committed to trying to break it. And the same thing, so like I said, like on my mom's side, they don't really know about this holiday, or they probably do, and they're just gonna say they're celebrating it because, that's what we do when we like find something new. We latch on without the commitment. It's like, oh, we're celebrating Juneteenth. And we're just gonna do the exact same thing that we do on 4th of July, fire up the grill. And like, I don't think we're gonna really be trying to stay true to the tradition of the holiday. And I think, like, for a lot of my family, if I was to say, hey, we should start celebrating Juneteenth and not July 4th, and here's why, will they acknowledge the impact of the history behind it? Yes. Would they actually listen to me and stop celebrating July 4th? No. Why? They don't want questions. They've already been doing it this way for a while. There's no reason to change. If it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? So that's kind of like what I would be kind of sad about. Like, even myself, am I gonna not celebrate July 4th? No, because there's too many people who would celebrate July 4th. That's difficult to do, to go against. Sorry, I don't want to come to your barbecue because that's not my holiday. Like, that feels, you don't want to do that. You don't want to be that person. Would you celebrate both holidays? Probably. The same way that there are some people who celebrate Hanukkah and Christmas, not because they want to, but because they kind of feel forced to.
Yeah, yeah, and it is kind of, I think, sad a little bit that there is that distinction, and that people feel that need for that division of July 4th and Juneteenth, of like, no, no July 4th, because it's bad, like that, because July 4th is the holiday for America and Americanism.
Exactly. People
It's
were
very
still
sad that,
slaves.
it's very sad that, like, we haven't fixed society enough where people feel like it, like they can be proud to be American and proud to be an ethnic minority. Like, that is actually kind of a dystopian hellscape the more you think about it. That is the country.
However, the way that I will be taking part in Juneteenth is our local community will be actually having a Juneteenth celebration at Miller Park. It's going to be a bunch of like vendors and organizers and organizations and charities and activities. I have signed up to be a performer. I was going to do slam poetry talking about, just like heritage and being Black in America, identification, representation, things of that sort. And I'm also signed up to be a volunteer for some of the children activities there as well, where they're going to be teaching about Juneteenth and some of the history behind it and some activities and stuff just for them to do as well. The only downside to this event is that it's a bring your own chair event.
Oof.
The only downside.
But I think that's actually probably a perfect point to wrap this all up then. Because I think we covered the holiday quite well, and we got to talk into some of the nuances and some of the cultural divides between it.
Yep. And for the people listening, last thing real quick, Nikita, would you like to tell people where Miller Park is and what town so that they know if they hear this and want to come?
Miller Park is in Bloomington Normal, Bloomington side, obviously. Yep. Please do come through if you live near or are in Bloomington Normal. Type in Miller Park into your, little phone, little cellular device as I pull out the exact date now.
Yep. Your mobile communications device.
Oh,
we are not robot aliens from the future.
Not at all. Saturday, June 18th, the day before the actual holiday, at 12 noon until 6 p.m. at 1020 South Morris, with 2 R's, Avenue in Bloomington, Illinois. It is free. You don't have to pay. Godspeed on finding parking.
Yep.
Even in a city that's not Chicago, very hard to find parking.
And that being said, I want to thank you for being our first guest speaker. And if you have anything you want to shout out besides the event, feel free. Like if you have a social media account, if you want people to follow you.
Just say whatever's in your heart, Nikita.
Yeah. No pressure.
My Instagram is living, LIVIN, dead, DAED, girl, GURL, 1369. It is going to be a picture of my lovely self. And you will see that I have all of my credentials right there. Graduated from ISU with these two. I am an actress. I am a poet. That is part of the reason I will be performing at our Juneteenth celebration. And I actually am currently working on a couple of projects that I'm excited about. So if you do follow me, stay tuned and you'll find out what those are. I don't want to give it away right now.
Yes, leave the suspense.
Gotta keep the good vibes. Gotta keep the good vibes.
So go give her a follow, check her out. And if you guys enjoyed listening to the podcast, be sure to drop a like down below, subscribe, follow us on whatever platform you're listening to. And we will catch you guys in 2 weeks with our... Oh, Colum has something to say.
I was going to jump in on the coming up schedule here.
Yes.
So coming up for you, dropping just 2 days before Juneteenth, H.H. Reeves will be performing "Their Eyes Were Watching God" by Zora Neale Hurston, a African American anthropologist.
Love that book
and
so
author.
Much.
Yeah. You'll get to watch me read that in my horrible voice. That is the voice in which I speak at all times. Followed by Call of the Wild a week later. And the next time we'll be seeing you on this podcast will be for our Pride Month special with Sappho of Lesbos, the world's first lesbian, according to history.
And keeping the trend of the guest speakers continuing, Nikita here will be joining us for that one as well. So we're going to have just a month of Nikita as our representative in both communities.
I am Black and I am gay. This is my month.
Yeah.
All right.
Just appear before a corporation and shout, "Fear me."
Governments fear me. Corporations want to be me.
I am Black, I am gay, and I am female. Fear me.